Okay. Well, thank you. In connection to that, okay, we use the term. There's even chapters or maybe even books written about rule-governed behavior.
Mhm.
Uh, how do you see that in your, for people who are watching us who don't know much about psychology but are interested in seeking help or counseling or psychotherapy from someone like you, or someone here in the Philippines
Mhm.
who's
Mhm. Mhm.
doing this. How can you cite some examples of
Sure.
when
Yeah.
rule governed behavior becomes a problem in life? uh, for example.
Well, we can start from the question you asked earlier. It's like
uh,
it seems like it's a rule. I will define what it is in a moment, but
yes.
it seems like
Mm.
it's a rule in Filipino to be a nurse because it's
Yes,
a good
yes,
career, right? So
yes,
it's not necessarily a rule in the sense of it's obligated. If you don't do it, you're going to be punished necessarily. You know,
yes,
like the
yes.
term rule is usually employed to talk about the laws and or a game and what are the rules you need to respect. But conceptually, it's broader than that. You can think of it also as principle or belief, also
Yes, yes.
instruction or ways of trying to. I give you just a few synonyms so that we're not too stuck with this particular term because sometimes it's misunderstood because of that.
Mm.
Um, Intentions to a plan. So, for example, if I say, um,
Mm-hmm.
I in order to feel good, I need to see my friends often. That's a
Yeah.
rule
Okay.
from our perspective. It's a principle. It's a theory. You could say also. It's like something that I know will, if I follow it,
Yes, yes,
I will get the results that the rule says.
yes, yes.
Right? It's
Okay.
you can think of it as a sort of make like a recipe. You know, if you're cooking, there's a lot of
Yes, yes,
rules in it. It's like
yes,
first you did, then do that, then do that, and then in the
yes.
end you have that dish that you're preparing and it should taste the way it was supposed to and look the way it's supposed to. So it's a set of descriptions of the what you're doing, the behavior, and
Mm.
what's going to happen. You remember what I said earlier about behavioral psychology and
Mm.
the key element is response, the influence of consequences. You know, if I do something and then there's a consequence, then it's going to influence my response. Well, it's the
Mm.
same thing here. If the rule says that
Mm.
speaking clearly is going to lead to understanding from you and nodding, okay, well, then I'm going to try to speak clearly, and if you don't understand, I'm going to try to reclarify, give you an example. And so
Yes,
the
yes.
rule that I'm following helps me adjust my behavior. But if I
Okay.
didn't have any rules about that, like I said, people who have difficulty with social intelligence, they might like that. Some people it's because they have not learned it well in their childhood, for example, in their social
Mm.
context. They did not learn the good social skills, how to interact with others, or it could be for other reasons. But so that's examples of rules. The rules can be about the what is a meaningful life made of. What should I do
Oh,
to have a meaningful life? Should I be married, have kids?
I should
Like I
have.
said earlier,
Maybe here
yeah,
it's more about the meaningful life is having financial security,
yeah, maybe
because
it could be
we're in
that.
a developing country, so the
Mm,
our views are kind of limited to, oh, you shouldn't be worrying about your next meal, or
mm,
the roof
mm,
above
mm,
your
mm,
head, that it's gonna
mm,
rain tomorrow, that it's
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
fly off tomorrow,
yeah,
that
yeah. There
we're
is a
gonna
sense
be
more of a day-to-day
urgency. Yes.
urgency. I see.
Yeah.
I like I said, I don't know enough about your culture, especially
Mm.
in the country. So my experience is that it's always more complex than it seems,
Yeah.
and that even when we are focused on very concrete things, daily things,
Mm.
uh, there is still a meaning and spiritual dimension in it. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not completely explicit, perhaps,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but you know, it's like this. The concept of the hierarchy of needs that was developed by a psychologist called Maslow in the 60s, I think.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's the idea is like it's often represented as a pyramid because the first, it's basic needs, so
Yes, yes,
food and being
yes,
able to be warm enough, and then to remember all the levels. But it goes to the more abstract, so the more
yes, yes,
spiritual self-actualization, and
yes.
it was not actually meant to be a hierarchy in a linear way,
Stages.
as
It's
if,
not.
yeah, it's not supposed to be understood that way, but over
Uh,
time it became like that. And
okay.
people often, I've noticed, think that you first need this and then you can do that and then you
Yes,
can do
yes.
it. It would be like, if then in that case you could only explore meaning of life, spirituality, if
At
you
the
have all
very.
the first things. But
Yes,
that
yes.
doesn't work like that. uh,
Oh.
no, because people who are depressed might lose appetite, for example. In fact, that's very common. They don't want to get up anymore. They don't want to do these basic things. Why?
Mm,
Because there's no purpose. And so what are you
mm.
going to do? They can eat, like I'm talking about people who have they have food. It's not like they don't eat because they don't have food. They can, but
Yes.
they don't want to, or they would like to want, but it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Like very commonly, you see people who will say that like they have everything they need, they should be happy,
Yeah.
and they're not, and they don't understand why. Maybe
Yeah.
because they approach all these stages
Uh,
without considering that meaning needed to be infused all along. That's one way of thinking about it.
I see.
So you see, I go back
Okay.
to your first question when I talked about my motivation, what brought me to psychology. To me,
Yes,
that's
yes.
an example of actually having that meaning. Uh, I'm not saying it was all perfect and all, but to me, the part about being passionate about what I was doing
Mm-hmm.
without necessarily having a specific goal, that's an example of that interconnection. Like
Mm.
I was able, I probably, to explore perhaps more than maybe other students who
Yeah.
had a very clear career path. I remember I had classmates and friends who, they knew what they wanted to do from the beginning, and they got to their career, they finished their stage much earlier, and then they had their career and all, and then maybe they're very happy. I'm not saying they're not happy, but um, they for me it didn't work that way. I needed to sense that it was meaningful, not necessarily knowing what concretely I was going to do, but that it was
Okay.
meaningful. So trying to reconnect with when I started to talk about the hierarchy of needs. Oh yeah, because we were saying that the daily motivation. My guess is that it's not just about that in Filipino. So again, I want to be
Mm.
cautious because I don't know, but I don't think there's any culture, any human
Yeah.
who's not spiritual. Actually, they might not think
Yeah.
about it that way. And I'm not talking just
Yes.
about religion. I'm talking about the importance of having meaning in your life. Like
Yes. Yes.
people they might get up, work hard, but they also think of their family, right? I need to work
Yes.
hard, so I need to bring food to my family. They might not have the time, the energy, or even the interest in exploring things that could be considered essential here because of the
Mm.
money and all the resources.
Mm.
But it's it doesn't mean that the, the, the again, it's a matter of how it's expressed,
Okay.
you know. uh, like, trying to give a concrete example here. um, I give an example just for me, because I can compare the cultures without knowing enough. But um,
Mm.
if I consider that connecting with my
Uh-huh.
family is important, it's a concept that's pretty broad. Then
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways that I can do it. It's not just when we are all together and sharing a meal for a special occasion. That's great. That's a very
Okay.
special moment. But that happens
Okay.
a few times in a lifetime, especially for me. Left my
Yeah.
country
Yeah.
of origin, so I don't see them often. And like I said, I haven't left Seattle in 2 years. So if I were thinking that the only way I connect with my family is when I see them in person, that means that I have
Yeah.
no connection with them in 2 years, right?
Yes. Yes.
But there's lots of other things, even just talking about them right now, thinking about them.
Mm.
So it's this idea of hierarchy like that, and
Mm.
where developing countries would still be at this level, taking
Yeah.
care of
Yeah.
food and everything, and then maybe if you get there, you will be able to. I don't believe it works that way at all. In fact, often I would say it's the opposite, because
Oh.
you get also
Oh.
yeah, because the more options you have and freedom, and the more you can get distracted by things that sure, it's great to have options. I'm not going to say our life is harder. No, it's not. It's just that it's not necessarily better in terms of integration of everything. Because when you have a
Uh,
lot of options, I've experienced it. Moving from France to the US. The US is everything is has to be very very free. You need to have a lot of choice and options. It's very strong in this culture. So you go to stores and you want to just buy some milk, and there's not just one kind, there's 10, 15 kinds.
uh,
And it's a struggle, because you have to think of which one you want, which one is really good for you, because it's sold doesn't mean it's necessarily good. I mean, to some extent yes, but in France things are more regulated in what is sold. Yes, it's more open, so you have to make your own choice. And the result is that it can still be hard to know what to do with your life. So it's a, like when I'm definitely not making the case that life is harder. I don't know. I think it's, you will find this tension, this dynamic everywhere. And I do think that the connection of meaning and really concrete physical needs is always necessary everywhere
uh,
you are, and all the time. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle, for sure. And
well, that.
RFT, I think,
Mhm.
can, I'm not going to say RFT can help. I think a lot of things can help. Religion, spiritual traditions, philosophy, everything. But RFT
Uh,
can study this particular process, and I think has an interesting way of approaching it. Perhaps we can say a little more with another question if you want to. I don't remember if you wanted to talk at some point about values or things like that, but that's something I could develop a little more. So at some point.
yeah, actually, that's an eye opener to me. I really thought Maslow meant that you have to take care of the basic needs first before you go up. So that's how I patterned my life.
And I was surprised. I was surprised too. It's like the stages of grief, like the person who developed that
Yes,
first
yes.
she didn't, I forgot her name, but she didn't mean it as
Kubler-Ross.
a particular
Yeah,
order.
yeah,
And but then over time, it starts with what are the different kinds, and then it's
yes,
listed, and then people start to think one, two, three. I mean, of course, Maslow meant basic, and then he may have come up with a pyramid. I'm not sure, but what I read, it could be wrong, but I read explicitly that it did not say that it had to be in a chronological order, or there was a
yes,
specific. And I agree that there's need that some needs are more basic and others are
yes,
more abstract, but it doesn't mean it's one first then the next.
yes.
Because once you have acquired all that, like a kid learns language, and then once they have language,
Uh,
there's the physical, there's language, and there's symbolic, and then it's interconnected. You cannot
uh,
separate it anymore.
yeah,
uh, think of it as you can make a soup.
yeah.
Is that something typical in
Soup? Yeah,
the food of a Filipino?
yes,
Uh, so I mean, most cultures probably, but so you make soup and then you put ingredients in it, and particularly of soup, it's because it's liquid, things gets mixed, and you cannot separate it easily. It's not like a dish where you can okay, maybe I put a little
yeah,
too much meat, I'm gonna remove a few pieces. In the soup it's harder. You can if you put some chunks of things, but if it's like say salt and then oil, and then, well, it's in there, right? You're not gonna
yes,
try
yes,
to remove it. Okay,
yes,
so it's meaning in life. Once it's developed, it's there. It's just you cannot remove it. It's impossible. Like I I don't know your culture very well, but I bet it's true also in your culture, and perhaps I'm wrong. We'll see. It will be a test. Um, in France, in the US, in most cultures that I know, kids, there is a stage at which they ask a lot of questions. And why? Why?
why,
Why?
yeah,
Right? Right? I'm guessing because I think it's a human thing. It's what leads to then um, rules, as we were saying. Like you understand how things work. It
yes,
helps you predict. It helps you
okay,
um, adjust your behavior. You want to know why, the purpose. And so
uh,
kids, they are great because they don't know yet those rules, and for them it's like everything is possible from a social perspective. There is no rule at first. It's like I want to
okay,
be fed. I cry, I'm fed, and then
yes,
progressively the things get more complex, and then there are rules, contingencies, we would say in behavioral terms, that become um, less um, it's never really arbitrary, but it can start to feel arbitrary. It's like, well, why do we have to say hello? Kids will ask
Mm.
things like that, or, oh, but why can't my daughter, she says things like that all the time. It's like, she wants to take, like stuffed animals or toys when we go out to a playground, and I know she's not gonna play with it there. It's not, she has it with her in the moment, she wants to keep it, and she said, oh, I want to take it there, and I know that what's going to happen is that once we're there, she will ask me to carry it. And so, but for her it's like, oh, but why not? Or sometimes it's things that they want to wear. It's like,
Uh,
that you should not put these things together. You can, but it's like, and actually it's a good way of reflecting on our own rules, because kids, they come, it's like culture. You go to another country and there are new things, and you say, oh, why do you do this, why do you do that? And then often people would say, oh, I never thought about it, because you come from another country, you ask me these questions, and for me it's obvious, and I never thought about it. And kids would do the same thing. They say, why? And so once you have developed that, once you're used to thinking in terms of purpose, meaning, the why,
uh,
especially if it's been not punished but instead encouraged,
yes, yes.
like the curiosity, because in some cases, unfortunately, I would say, it's shut down in kids. Like, don't ask why, that because I said so. And then
Yeah,
you have to follow the rule,
yeah,
a bit like a robot. It's like you have to,
yeah.
uh, I mean, you cannot always explain everything to kids, of course, but um, on the continuum, I worry about kids that are too much to just follow what they're supposed to, because then they are
Mm.
not learning to think for themselves, and they cannot uh, choose what they want to do in their lives as well, because
Mm-hmm.
they have not learned to explore, to question. My sense of good parenting is to let that kind of dynamic happen. I do the same with my students, clients. It's like,
Mm.
ask me why, and we'll talk about it. Maybe I have an answer, maybe I don't have an answer, maybe we'll figure it
Mm.
out together. And so, just to link it back to what I was saying earlier, once you think that way, once you have that in your repertoire, you can take it out of the soup. It's impossible. It's like you need a purpose for what you do. You may not think about it all the time. Like
Mm.
right now, I'm talking, I'm not thinking, oh, why are we doing it? But I need to have that available, or else, in fact, I know it happens. I go on because I talk and make connections, and then I say, okay, wait, what are we doing here? Okay, think of time, your answer. I need to be able to refocus on the purpose right now, or
Okay.
else it's just it goes all over the place. Like I said earlier, I could be depressed because I don't see any purpose in what I'm doing. What's the point? Like,
Uh,
who cares, and then so, but it's gonna be a struggle, because in fact I cannot remove it. I need it. It's like, it seems like it's not there, but it's there, because now I've learned that my life needs to have a purpose. You see what I
mm.
mean?
Mm. Yeah. I remember in some cases where, parents have a different rule about how kids need to do some things, and kids learn something, that they're different from their parents, from the way, they see
Mm-hmm,
it in the classroom, or maybe they see it on social media or anything like that. So yeah, I can see where, just in my memory, I can see some of the cases where the rules of the parents
mm-hmm.
conflict to the rules of the child,
Yeah.
or the rules of the husband conflict to the rules of the wife,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, you know the rules of the
And rules
employee.
inside in the rules inside myself too. The rules that like for me, I'm a very young father. I have very young kids, and that's
Mhm,
for a lot of people, when they become parents, it starts to, there's be a conflict between what
mhm,
I should do as a parent, what I should do in my work, and then so
mhm,
it's a conflict of rules. Often you need to find a way to integrates to make it work, or else you
mhm.
are split, you're fragmented, and it can be with other people, with society, with yourself. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'd like to pick your brain.
Yeah, the
That's
concept of rule
very.
is a really good one for approaching
I'm
a
sorry.
lot of topics. I said the concept of rule, that you asked the question, what are rules, and all. with it's a pretty simple concept, but like I
Yeah,
said, with all these concepts, they are simple at first, and then you expand, and you're like, oh wow, it's actually really useful to think about it,
exactly.
to
Well,
to think this way. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, Let me talk about the elephant in the room. I don't know if I'm using the right metaphor here.
Mm,
Uh, I often listen to Stephen Hayes. He has a lot of guestings on podcasts and all that,
yeah.
YouTube videos. Uh, I heard he talked about he's wondering. Okay, the elephant in the room is a pandemic.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so we're probably missing out on something if we don't talk about it. All right, and it's a big
Sure. Yeah.
problem in your country, in my country as well. All right, there's
Mm-hmm.
a large, not he- large minority. It's not a majority; it's a minority, but it's a big chunk of the population
Mm-hmm.
that are anti-vax or vaccine hesitant. All right,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard Stephen Hayes say something like, "Well, why are you letting the virologist or the
Mm-hmm.
epidemiologist talk convince people to
Mm-hmm.
get the vaccine? You should have a psychologist or somebody
Mm-hmm.
who knows
Mm-hmm.
about how the
Yeah.
mind works to
Yeah.
help people, to encourage people to,
Yeah.
and there's all these are we going to limit access to people who are not vaccinated?
Mm-hmm.
Are we
Mm-hmm.
going to
Mm-hmm.
make it hard for them to get their, to get to the movies or something
Mm-hmm.
like that?
Yeah.
So uh how can RFT, a science more worthy of the human condition, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
CBS.
Well,
How
the
can
CBS.
RFT
Yeah. Mm,
or CBS help
mm.
in this situation that we find ourselves in?
Yeah. So CBS, in the final year, is a contextual behavioral science, which
Yes.
is almost a synonym for behavioral psychology, but let's not get too much into it. It's like the broader science in which RFT is situated by focusing on language and cognition.
Yes.
CBS is behavior in general, and then RFT is really specific to that, although
Yeah.
it's very broad. Um, and then a broader, we could say psychology, and then broader could say science and all. I think psychologists have been, yeah, I guess complaining about the same thing that Steve is complaining about. Skinner, the first main figures of behavioral psychology, a really, really important psychologist in the US who worked from the 30s through the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a few books that explicitly said, we've made a lot of progress with science, all the things that we can do now, but like in terms of medicine, in terms of technology, and transportation, and things like that. But there's an area in which we need to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to do now to focus on, or else we may even actually suffer from the progress that we've made with science. At that
Mm-hmm.
time, give examples of how science can lead to technological development that are then the cause of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it now all the time. At that time, it was things like I think it was talking about pollution or the nuclear bomb and things like that. Now it's like technology is everywhere, so we can almost never talk about our problems without linking it to some extent to, well, that's because of our way of life, or the way we have developed all the technology. We're on internet, on smartphones, on these things, and then the pollution, and then we travel too much, and then the pandemic is an example too. It's like, well, if we didn't travel that much, the pandemic would not have spread. The virus would not have spread as fast and as everywhere.
Uh,
It's. I mean, of course, it happened before. There's been other pandemics in the history, but the 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 spread, of course, is been different. Given how fast we travel nowadays, and on the other
uh,
hand, information has also circulated in a different way with the internet and all, and
uh,
that's, I think that the role of psychology is for sure they could be useful, because like I said, there is psychology in delivering a message trying to influence. Politicians do that. That's what they do.
Yes, yes, yes.
Epidemiologists and everything. If you communicate and you want to be understood, like the sort of main figure in the U.S. Who talks about who's the epidemiologist, Dr. Fauci, is
Mhm.
he's been a very patient person and all, very empathetic and all. And then over time, you can see that he's gotten very frustrated lately. He said a few things that seem to show like he's getting frustrated. I don't know. Context must be difficult to do this job. I don't know, but it's just that okay, he wants to be heard and he wants people to do what he think is best. Totally understandable. I do the same with my kids, with my students, with
Oh yeah. Okay.
with people. I'm driving and I'm like, why are you not moving faster? Yeah, that's why. Yeah, it's all the time. It's like I see it in a certain way. I know it's right. Why are you not saying it that way? So we all have that sort of thing. Psychologists, it's interesting. I think yes, I think it would be good if they were involved. I don't think it would be good if they were the ones in charge only of taking care of it, because I think there's flaws also in the discipline. We always end up seeing things from one perspective and missing things. Just like probably epidemiologists, and it's been talked about. They focus on the virus, eliminating the virus, how it can spread. No, they're not psychologists, so not
Yeah.
only they maybe not be the best to deliver a message, although they probably learn that in their training and with experience, but that's not their domain of expertise, the communication and all. And also, they are not experts in the consequences of their policies from a psychological perspective, like confinement. We cannot travel anymore. We need to wear masks. I said not aware. That's not true. They're aware of it. They talk about it, but that's not their domain of expertise. And as a result, I think I'm not the only
Uh,
one. They don't take it seriously enough. So there's two aspects here. I think in what I don't know if Steve has both in mind here, but to me that these two aspects are important: is how we communicate effectively, how we transform how influence people's behavior,
mhm.
once we decide, okay, the best thing is people wear masks, for example, or vaccination. I'm not even making a judgment about it. I think it does. That's not the point here.
Mhm.
Could have different opinions even, but let's say we decide that's what's best. As the people in charge say that's what's best. Okay, how are we going to influence people? Well, if it's an authoritarian country, you know what's going to happen, right? It's like you force people, you can put people in jail, things like that. That's the
Yes.
extreme. On the
Yes.
on the other side, it's like no, people do whatever they want, and in
Yes.
the middle, most countries, it's like okay, well, we don't want to force people, we don't want to punish them, but we need to influence them,
Yeah.
and it's a context that's new where first of all it's hard to make the right decision because there's a
Mhm.
lot of factors, and like I said, psychological factors are important, and I don't think they've been considered enough. um, and then it's okay, how do we deliver it, influence people? But it's not just the problem is not just to change people's behavior, it's to do it in a way that respects the values of our society.
Okay.
Yeah, because like it's easy to agree, at least you and I in this context, to say okay, we don't want to put people in jail because they don't get a vaccine. That seems like that would not be right. That would not be right to me. For microchip, it's like no, that's uh, we could talk about why, by the way. That's the kid, like why, but why, because after why not, right? It's important to have an answer to that, by the way,
Okay.
because if not, then you can you then you can drift away. You need to know why. And yeah, I haven't thought of it specifically, so I don't have like quick answer, but I know that I would
Uh-huh.
not want that. But then, okay, there's that orange where we say, oh, it's acceptable if we what, like, yeah, psychologists are good to influencing people, yeah, but we don't want to manipulate people. I don't think that
Uh,
would be good. Like,
uh,
sure, I can come up with ideas of how to frame a message, I'm a
mhm.
expert in language, that's going to lead people to want to get vaccine, how
Uh-huh.
they,
Uh-huh.
but to what extent is it going to be me deciding for people what they should do
Mhm.
and know how to say it? It's like seduction, I will
Uh-huh.
buy you a house and we'll have a wonderful life and everything. And, and then it's like, well, where is it? It's it's fine that we cannot predict completely what's going to happen, of course, and we need to make a decision. And so, but I think it's important to be transparent also in even when we influence people. The kind of
Okay.
therapy that I do and my teaching, and you've seen that in my training, the the stance is first we call experiential, and it's very similar to what I said about the
Mm-hmm.
um, encouraging kids to ask why, not be afraid of it. It's like, I don't want to teach people to do something. So whether it's clients, students, kids, or if I were doing politics, I don't influence people. Um, Even if I think it's good for them, I don't want to take away their sense of autonomy, agency. We use this term. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, I know why. It really comes down to that. I know why, and even if people may not have a choice, sometimes it's like, well, if I were, if I don't respect the driving rules, I'm going to get into trouble, and I could go to jail if I do something really wrong. And so, in a way, I don't have a choice. But knowing why, well, because if not, we would have an accident, and we have to be careful. We need to be able to drive. It helps accept it, and it helps. You remember what I said about integration of self, other, higher power? It's the same thing here. Now, when I drive slowly, I'm like, okay, I don't want to get into trouble, but also I don't want to have an accident with another person. I don't want to risk hurting someone, and I have to respect society. I also need to trust that people are making decisions. So when everything feels right, then it's like, okay, I think that's good. That's a society uh, uh, health. I think can be, health at every level can be assessed to me based on that measure of integrity. And so my worry, I don't know what Steve has in mind, that we haven't talked about it explicitly, but I've heard things like that. And psychologists have been used in
Uh-huh.
the US by government agencies. They've been used by the CIA. They've
Mm-hmm.
been used by candidates for the presidency. Obama had a consultant in social psychology for his first campaign or second campaign, I think, second
Oh
campaign.
yeah, yeah.
Some very famous one, that Robert Cialdini is a very famous social psychologist. He wrote
Okay.
books about influence and all. And I think it was in the panel of psychologists who were consulted by the Obama's campaign in 2012. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and so nothing wrong with that. I mean, if, this is as you you ask people for help, and then can be
Uh-huh.
paid for something, okay. But um, nothing wrong with that, as long as, to me,
Mm-hmm.
as long as the psychologist works, it's not just influencing people to do what is good for them. I think it's not enough. To
Mm.
me, it's important that people also know what you're doing to some extent. It's honesty with the
Uh-huh.
degree of like that's what I do with my kids. It's like, I know they can't understand everything yet. If I start to explain the whole reasons why we have to go to school and it's time to get up, and if I go all
Mm.
the way to, in the future you'll have a job, no, my daughter is 3, I'm not gonna do that. But I can at least say certain things that she can understand that are true. Like, I'm not going to say to her, uh, well, if you go to school, you're gonna have a great day. I don't know if
Mm.
she's gonna have a great day.
Mm.
I'm not going to say, well, because I said so, you have to go. That's authoritarian, and that doesn't
Yeah.
help her understand why, and get why she does what she. So she
Mm.
ends up just doing what I do. I don't
Uh-huh.
want to say, if you go to school tonight, you'll have candies, because it's too disconnected from the experience of going to school. And then it's like, oh, great, she wants to go to school, but just to have candies, it's not. uh, I want to
Mm.
help her get in touch with what's intrinsically beneficial in going to
Mm.
school. So what can I
Mm.
do? I can say, uh, oh, you're going to see your friends. Yesterday, you said that you had a good time with your friends, and don't you want to see them? And sometimes my daughter says, no, I don't want to.
Mm.
So when you use this approach, you have to be ready for the response to. different than what you want. And that's why
Mm.
that's why often teachers, parents, politicians, they don't like to do it that way, because they're afraid that if they let people they're in charge of think too much, contradict
Mm.
them,
Mm.
everything's gonna fall apart. Like, what if
Mm.
we let people ask questions? Why would we need to wear a mask? Why do kids need to wear a mask at school when most studies, from what I read, are not very conclusive that it's helpful?
Mm.
Then so it's better to not let people question that, and present it
Mm.
in a way that's going to make them believe that it's the right thing. So then we can come up with campaigns showing kids wearing a mask, and parents say, it's commercial, and so
Mm.
psychologists, if they are used for that kind of thing, I actually don't think it's a good idea, because it could
Okay.
actually lead to a worse situation where people are manipulated instead
Okay.
of and I'd rather be under pressure to do something, but I know what you're doing.
Okay.
Like, you're telling me, if you don't wear a mask, you go to jail. But at least you're clear in you're honest. Then, well, I mean, it depends. I say I prefer. It depends on the consequence. It depends on what you're asking me to do. Of course, wearing a mask, jail is pretty. Well, okay.
Mm.
But my point is, I I worry about the lack of honesty, transparency
Mm.
that the use of psychology could lead to
Yeah.
in uh, in the way we manage societies.
Yeah.
And as psychology develops and we're getting better at using it at a large scale level, and that's something that CBS is interested in, we have to be very careful with that, I think.
Okay. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I misunderstood Steve. Maybe
No, I
I
doubt it. I think, no, I doubt it. I think knowing him, I think it's your question, I understood it as
uh,
uh, we should use more psychologists because they're experts in influencing behavior and in
yes.
knowing how to talk to people, and that makes sense. I'm not against that, but
Uh,
I also want to present that side, because
mm-hmm.
I think we can get excited about science, and probably American culture is pretty strong, and since the American culture influences the whole world still,
Yeah. Yeah.
then we look at the US and we're like, oh yeah, they know what to do. They really get this right. It's
Yes.
but
Yes.
not necessarily. It's
Yeah.
it it's when there's a progress, when we develop a technology, it's like we
Mm-hmm.
also have to consider how it's going to change the
Mm.
system, the dynamic,
Okay.
and being able to influence people too well. I want to say there's there's a risk in it too. It's
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Like,
All
people won't
right.
question anymore. But if psychologists include that kind of um, uh, um, what I'm describing here, the importance of developing people's autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm all for it. I think it's actually a good idea.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, maybe this would be my coup de grace, my last question,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
which goes down to the philosophy
Yeah.
behind RFT or CBS,
Hmm.
all of this.
It's a good
Uh,
way of wrapping
yeah,
up,
and
actually.
and and how we can relate it to everyday life. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I attended one of Dr. Hayes' workshops, and he recommended this book by Stephen Pepper. Okay,
Hmm.
A World
World
Hypothesis.
hypothesis.
Yes, and with my other readings, I think it's more about two main ways of seeing things or
Hmm.
thinking. This the mechanistic and the
Hmm. Hmm.
contextualist. All
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
in everyday life, okay, uh, with partly explaining it to the ordinary person.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
because I've been reading the book and it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's
I have not
philosophical.
I've not read it, but I've been
Yeah,
talking with a good friend of mine, Fabian Mairo, who's a Argentinian, is a
yeah,
psychologist in Buenos Aires, and
yeah.
he read the book. We talked about it, so I I learned a little more about the content, but the rest of it I knew from the articles of Steve. Um, so there's actually more than the mechanistic and contextualist. There's different uh, other kinds to
Yeah,
the, but
formism.
that's the,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's the, yeah, that's the two that are often mentioned in the context of psychology and clinical psychology, because um, the I think it's the two form philosophies are in not necessarily completely in opposition, but that's what Steve developed with ACT
Yes.
is was really meant to emphasize that distinction, context versus mechanism. But there are other things that we could highlight too. So,
So
what is
let's
the
say
difference?
if you are, let's say, a father or an employee or a child or a student or a husband or a
Yeah,
spouse or a wife,
yeah, yeah,
you know, how it's always a big question to me. How can this, even as a therapist or a counselor, how does this inform you in terms of how you behave in those
yeah,
roles? You know,
yeah. Well, yeah. So,
so maybe first
uh,
explain to our
sure.
audience what,
Yeah.
in
Well,
simple
let's.
terms, what's
Yeah,
mechanism, what's
yeah,
contextualism,
yeah.
yeah, and then how does it
Uh,
apply to, let's say, your role as a father.
Yeah,
How do you become a
sure.
mechanistic, how can you become mechanistic
Yeah.
sometimes and of contextualist sometimes,
Well, I
right?
think, I mean, it's the the Pepper's the idea of root metaphors is that it's saying it's like so yeah, mechanistic is like you approach humans as machines, or
Okay.
yourself as a machine, and
Okay.
it works to some extent. It's like, in fact, we often say that, right, in medicine. Oh yeah, it's the body functioning like the machine, and it's like the brain. And yes and no, because the machine is not alive. It's not. It interacts with the context too, like a car. Okay, if a stone, I drop a stone. Well, it's not a machine; it's an object. So let's stick with machine. A TV, computer. Okay,
Mm.
it can be complex. It can even function. It seems like it functions itself, right? But you plug it to electricity and all these things. Okay, but the particularity is that it's fixed, so that I can take pieces out of it, replace them, fix it. Like,
Okay.
in a way, a computer is will never die because I can always replace pieces. In
Okay.
in practice, we don't do that because it would be too expensive, and then you want to buy a new one, or same with cars. Okay, but
Okay.
technically you can, because it's not alive. So it's like, well, all you need to do is replace the pieces, the pieces, right? It's possible,
Mm.
because nothing is going to be lost at some point. And what I said earlier, the question earlier about the influencing people and the importance of autonomy, that's not something you have to worry about with machines. You can
Okay.
manipulate them, change them, dismantle them, decide what you're going to do with it, because they're not people. They don't have their own feelings. They don't have their own motivation, desires, and all these things. So you don't have to worry about it. You can be very unilateral. You can intervene on a machine. I'm going to
Okay.
fix the machine. It can
Okay.
be complex.
Okay.
It's not necessarily simple, but
Yes.
it's very like I said, unilateral. And so the problem in approaching humans like that in psychology is
Mm.
that, well, it leads to what I was saying earlier. It's about the problem with manipulating people. It would be like, well, I know how to influence people, so we're going to deliver
Uh,
the message in a certain way, and then they're gonna start going to get vaccines.
yeah, yeah.
That's like an example of mechanism, because it's very linear. Like, I know what's good for them, I'm going to get them to do that, and then
Okay.
they will do whatever. It's like authoritarianism is a form of mechanism, I think. It's,
Uh-huh.
well, you know well, it's dehumanizing.
Yeah.
You treat people like they are your objects. And in parenting, it's the same thing. It's like, well, because I said so, so you're going to do it. It's like, wait a second. And it's hard to if you take extremes, you get it, and most people be like, I don't want to do that. But in between, it's much harder. Every day I can catch things, and I'm like, maybe I was uh, like, I could say, here I treated my kid maybe more like objects that I hate saying that, because, like, oh, people are what are people going to think here? But I'm trying to be honest. It's like, you know, I feel like I'm on a rush and I need things to go fast, and my daughter gets a little upset, and I'm like, okay, let's go, we need to go, or and then in that
Mm, mm.
moment, it's not that necessarily that I tell her to go fast. It's not that. It's that in that moment, maybe I'm talking to her as if I was talking to, you know, like nowadays we have robots and hey, can you play that music or things like
Yes,
that, and it's
yes,
like
yes.
because I said so, it's going to happen.
Yes, yes.
Fortunately, humans don't let themselves be treated like that. Sometimes in the short term we do. Something it can take a long time. Sometimes a whole life, and a whole society can let sometimes the government do that, and then at some point you cannot take it anymore. There's a revolution, something like that. But
Yeah, yeah.
often what happens is that it's more like, hey, I don't talk to me like that. Hey, uh, I'm not going to do it just because you tell me to do it. You know, it's like we react against that. So
Okay.
mechanism, it would be it's a dead end because you force you force things, or you think you can fix a person
Mm-hmm.
uh, as if they're okay. Yeah, I can do this and do that, and then you'll be good, and then you can leave. You know, and no, and so that leads us to contextualism and the difference. In contextualism, the approach is that people live in context; they interact with the context.
Okay.
Right? So I was saying earlier the relationship between what I do and the consequence. Consequence is the context. It's like, okay, right
Yeah.
now
Uh-huh.
you're my main context, because I when I talk, I look at you and I pay attention to your reactions, your questions. So I try to. But there's also all the things that I'm thinking of. That is my context, my history, and the light, the time of day. All these things are part of my experiences. We could say also things that I'm interacting with, and that
Yes, yes.
influence me at each moment. You know, and so I'm responding to all that. All these things influence me, and I influence it. It's a dynamic between the context and me, right? So you and I are interacting with each other. I am your context, and
Yes.
you are my context, and
Mm-hmm.
together we're interacting, and we're going to be the context of people who listen to this podcast. And so it's not fixed, like here's the context, here's the behavior, the person. It's more, we go back to the first question, you know, it's like the relation, it's a relation, it's a dynamic, it's a relational dynamic.
Okay.
So the results of a different approach like that is that it's less, you cannot control it the same way. You cannot, we could say, you cannot control it at all,
Mm.
because uh, because as soon as you're touching or trying to influence, you're transforming it, and so then it's already, your prediction is already different. It doesn't necessarily match. For example, um, going back to the pandemic and using psychology, you think, oh, vaccination is the best for people. Okay, fine, let's assume that. Then we say, how can we deliver the message so that people are going to massively go vaccination? Okay,
Mm.
let's show the positive aspects. Let's say this. Let's say, okay, great. People vaccinate. But you approach it, as I said, mechanistically. Like you know that people need to do that, and then they're going
Mm.
to do it, and we don't have to. We have to take into consideration their feelings, what they think about it. So it's like, even if it's not by forcing them physically, it's still, I know better,
Mm.
right? So I know what to do. I can control, I can predict, I can control, and that's what's
Uh.
going to happen. Well, maybe you'll get to 100% of the population vaccinated,
Mm.
but what did you lose there? Well, just like with your kids, I've seen people uh,
Mm.
who have kids who behave exactly what they are told to. And
Okay.
at first glance, you might think that they are wonderful kids, and they, wow, they wonderful
Yeah.
parenting, and look
Yeah.
at that, they are so kind, polite, and they never, and and that part of it might be true. It's not all or nothing, but then you can also uh, see. I'm not making prediction necessarily. It's complex, but I've seen the trajectory of, I work more with adults, and then you explore their childhood, and it's like, yeah, my parents, no, they didn't let me choose too much. They were
Uh.
pretty strict, and all that. And
Uh.
the struggle often is around, like, I people have a hard time knowing what they want. Go back to one of your questions. You know, it's like, uh, I I don't trust myself because I was not trusted when I was a kid.
Okay.
I didn't learn to trust myself because I had to do what I was supposed to do.
Uh,
um, or even when my parents would praise me or would say, yeah, go ahead, you can do what you want. Now I look back and I understand that they were influencing me to actually do what they wanted.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, we can manipulate each other without realizing it often. It's like, say, oh, you look good today. It's very, very nice. Oh, thank you. But maybe you're influencing someone to wear what you want to wear, or maybe you're being nice because that way they will do something in return. So that's mechanistic because you have an agenda and you're going from one place to another. You're controlling like you have a robot, and they can
Uh,
we talk a lot about artificial intelligence these days. It's like
yeah.
right now they're still robots. They still do what we tell them to do, and even when they can have a conversation, it's still based on how we program them. The
Okay.
question is, are we going to develop robots so that at some point they will have their own agency? There's a lot of movies and TV shows about that.
Okay.
That will mean at some point that they have autonomy of thinking, maybe even
Uh,
feelings. It depends how we define it.
mm-hmm.
And the concern is like, well, but then maybe we created a new species, and then how do we treat them? Because then do
Okay.
we have to give them rights? Some movies about that. So contextualism, it's a different thing because it's like, well, where does the you come start and where do I start? We're in an interaction here. We're intertwined. Like even when I said you're the context, you are my context. Well, we can also say we're building a context together. Etymologically, context meant it's like knitting. It's like string threads together. Like when you build say like a sweater, and it's like threads coming together. So it's context is not a thing. It's a coming together of things. It's a
Mm-hmm.
real relating process. So
Mm-hmm.
contextualism means we're never going to approach humans as fixed pieces and say, here's the brain, here's the heart, and here's the thing, and here's people behaving, and here's the context that's going to do this and that. No, it's much more dynamic. um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a way of thinking that actually is developing more and more in science in general. uh, we see it in
Mm-hmm.
computer science, we see it in physics,
Mm-hmm.
in really literally astrophysics, and literally everywhere, in part because the technology has helped us develop ways of modelizing in terms of mathematics, the complex models that are not fixed, not linear. It's like
Mm-hmm.
pandemics actually, they did the same thing. It's not like you do this then something is going to happen. It's that you do this then something is going to happen, and then it's going to change the result of what you were thinking, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh well, I thought it was a good decision, but now that the result is what I wanted, it has changed things completely differently. So now we're back to we're more and more understanding how the world can function in uh, multi-directional ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, um, going back to the question about the
Like
politics,
in
public
everyday
health.
life. Wow.
Yeah, well, in everyday life, it's like everything really. It's like, and it's
Like
it's hard to deal with
let's
it
take the
because it's like,
example
well,
of your daughter, or your
yeah, yeah,
child
yeah,
going.
yeah. But it's like there's no simple answer in a way. When you're
Okay.
when you're a contextualist, it's
Uh.
like, okay, what should I do now? Because she doesn't want to go to school. So what's the context? Okay, it's like she's tired, and
Mm,
but maybe I can draw her attention to she's going to see her children then, and
uh.
okay, so you see, I'm using the context by
Uh.
connecting her to part of the context that might
Uh-huh.
make it more likely for her to want to go to school, or for me
Mm.
to acknowledge her difficulties. But if you that's better than mechanism, perhaps, to some extent, because it's taking into account what is important for her, what motivates her. But if you really want to move completely to contextualism, not just a mechanism with a little bit of context, you have to understand that it's more of a whole dynamic, and that it's
Mm.
not fixed. Here's the context, here's the person. It's like where it's like the soup thing I was saying earlier. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can continue this metaphor to finish. It's like you're gonna said, soup mechanistic would be like, okay, great, I can remove the salt, I can put the salt back, the test, and no,
Oh, okay.
it's like, no, it's in it's mixed. You want more, you want it to feel less salty, you're gonna have to add something there. You're gonna have to and accept that there's going to be an interaction between the salt that's already in it and something
Mm,
else. I
yeah.
suppose you could add sugar if you want it to be sweeter, or you can add
Uh,
tomato or something. I'm not really an expert in cooking, but there's lots of
mm,
ways that you can change. And so contextualism is it's really like things are interconnected in such a way that you cannot really separate any pieces. You can take
mm.
different perspective. Say, do you want it to taste salty? Do you want it to be sweet? Do you want it to? And so from that perspective, is something missing? Okay, what can we increase? And
Oh,
sometimes it's counterintuitive. Sometimes because something is problematic, you're not necessarily going to uh, target that. You're going to do something else that's going to change that.
like
Like,
I'm starting to connect it with the counseling room or therapy room.
yeah,
It's like you're not going to take out the depression or the
no,
anxiety. It's impossible. It's like the
no.
soup, but
Yes,
you
exactly. It's
can.
part of the client's experience. It's their lives. And
Yes,
when we try to do that,
yes.
they do what I was saying earlier with mechanism. With it's that they revolt, or they comply for a while, but they will revolt at some point. Just like a society will be like, no, we don't want to do that because you're missing something.
Is that
You
how
know,
people end up coming back to their therapist with a new problem? Is
yes,
that how it
it
works?
can be. That's a possibility at least. It can be also because you discover, like as you grow,
Uh-huh.
now you have the possibility of interacting with other problems.
Yes.
It's kind of like the pyramid of needs in a way. It's like, okay, now that I'm less depressed and I can start having social interactions,
Uh-huh.
oh, can you help me with my social anxiety? you know Social
Uh-huh.
anxiety was not even I was not even aware of it because I was not interacting with people, so I was depressed. But I was depressed, and so I didn't even know what it was like to interact with people. Now I have social interaction, so I can explore my social anxiety. And then, oh great, now I'm in a relationship, but what about meaning of life? What about and so that's what I meant. Like, you fix something, but then you create new problems, and it's not bad. In fact,
Uh-huh.
calling it problems is probably already um, an issue, because then everything that is new, different, is like, oh, a problem to fix. You could say, well, you grow, you gain clarity in your life, integrity, and then what's going to happen? You're
Mm.
going to expand, and you're going to contact something that at some point is going to be a problem. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, what do we do? And the pandemic is an example again. It's like, well, we're interconnected, we travel, we have internet, we can we can, yeah, we can travel. And then what happens? Oh, well, yeah, because we can do that, we can spread also a virus. And now, we confine, no, we don't interact with anybody. Okay, but that's also a phase of a process. It's like, okay, we've learned something here.
Uh-huh.
And then probably what's going to happen is that we already see it. People, well, therapy, for example, a lot of therapists have started to do therapy over the internet because they could not see their clients in person.
Mm.
I don't know if that's something that you did too, but it
Yeah.
was in a lot of countries like that. And at first, it's like, oh, we cannot do it that way. It's not the same. And now, very quickly, people say, actually, it's really helpful. There's lots of things that I can do this way that didn't work before, and I probably continue to work that way, or at least part of it. So it's like the soup is too salty. I'm going to add something. Oh wow, I've created a new recipe that we started with
Uh,
an accident, and now I'm
uh,
like, you know what? It actually tastes good. Contextualism has more of that acceptance that
uh-huh.
things are not controllable, fixed, and that there's still going to be a lot of surprises. So, it's like improvisation. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
you can engage in the process. You cannot know what's going to happen next because that defeats the purpose. But you can respond to what happens in a way that keeps creating connection. And like I said, that's how I approach my studies in psychology. I told you that would that would link it back to it, and that all my answers would be in a way the same thing. It's like
Yeah.
it's I you know in a way I was contextualist without knowing it, I suppose, but perhaps we all are, because
Uh,
I think it's an expression of wanting to be alive, of
uh,
wanting to connect and to explore, and at the same time to to be to belong. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, obviously we could keep going on the philosophy, but
Yeah. You know,
yeah,
I probably had 15 questions for you, and we just had about less than 10.
maybe invite me again
It's like,
after you invited other people, and we can do a second part one day if you want. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
it's been wonderful. By the way, Matthew, before you go, you know, I listen to Kevin Polk sometimes, and he said, "You
Uh-huh.
want to go on with your shameless plug?"
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
uh, he's funny when I listen to him.
Yes, 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 yes.
Anyway, I want you to share. I don't know if you know, I am from the Philippines. I saw you because you worked with Stephen Hayes, and I saw your name in the books, and
Mhm.
that's how I got to know you. And uh, with internet, with the ebooks, anyone can attend your workshops or
Yep,
uh, read your work. So
yep.
anything new, anything you want to tell the people about
I
what you're doing now?
No, I don't have anything new coming out. I've been working
Mm-hmm.
on things for a couple of years, but I'm still not completely sure exactly what form it will take. Something that as it's a continuation of what I've been doing, but in terms of training, yeah, it's you can go check out the website, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's lots of resources. In general, you
Is
can look
that
at
language
RFT,
as
CBS,
language as
language as
intervention
intervention. Yeah,
dot com?
and you can
Mm-hmm.
yep, and you can check also the work of other people in RFT, Niklas Tornicki, even Barnes Holmes, Carmen Luciano. There are different people in the world who do things like that, and it's different perspectives. But yeah, I hope that people get interested in the Philippines and in this approach. Also, because I think each culture that gets interested in this approach end up adding something to a different perspective. That's what I did as a French, I think, and the more the different cultures get interested in this this approach, the more we benefit from it in the end. So it's not just the Americans are spreading the knowledge to the world. We need to think of it also as okay, what are the Americans missing that the rest of the world can also help with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for the privilege. Two
Thank you,
hours.
thank you.
Wow. I was
Yeah, it went
expecting,
fast.
yeah. So I'm so honored and privileged to have you as a guest, and you're my very first guest, and it's memorable. I learned so much. You know,
I wish you the best
it
for
even
the series of podcasts that you will record after.
yeah, and it busted the myth of the stages of Maslow's.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I hope I'm not gonna
yeah.
be proved wrong, but after all, that's okay. We'll have at least sparked an interesting exploration.
I
If
patterned my
you find
life.
out that I was wrong, you can tell me. What I can say is that if I was wrong about what he said, at least I can say that I disagree with him. But I think I don't even disagree with him, because I think it's a misunderstanding or a transformation of what he did.
Yes.
But you can check. Yeah.
All right.
I often
Thank
surprise
you.
people, by the way, when I say that. They often say, "Oh, really? I never heard of that." Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And more power to you and Bastyr University.
Thank you.
And stay safe out there.
All right.
We're hopefully at the end of the pandemic. So,
Yeah. Hopefully, yes. Yes, I hope.
okay.
All
You
right.
take care. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.
Thank you.